Alright guys, and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be discussing all of the mistakes Blizzard have made with Classic WoW all the way from the launch until today. But before we do that, I just wanted to quickly take the time to thank everyone for continuing to support this channel. These days I do get a lot of people messaging me in-game on various different servers, saying really encouraging things about how much my videos have actually helped them. And obviously it really means a lot to me because in my eyes that is the purpose of this channel, being fulfilled, because a lot of people ask why did I start YouTube, and I started making those crappy Unholy Death Knight videos back in Missa Pandaria just simply to help people, and now that has obviously extended to also simply entertaining people too. But anyway, I just wanted to say thanks, and if I could I would definitely all buy you a beer to show my gratitude. Anyway, let's get back to my favourite hobby, talking about everything that Blizzard have done wrong. Just a reminder guys, there's no need to take this video too seriously, we're just having a little bit of fun with a certain topic, and it's just some nerd's opinion on the internet at the end of the day. This doesn't mean that I totally hate Classic WoW, I just think Blizzard could have done a little bit of a better job. So a common practice on private servers is to obviously release a server with the latest patch build when it comes to character abilities, talents and item stats, just like Blizzard did. But unlike Blizzard, most private servers teams adjust the difficulty of the raid so that they aren't so easy that the raiding becomes trivial and boring, and consumables, resistance gear and min-maxing your character, leveling up your professions are actually required. Blizzard decided to not adjust the raid difficulty in the slightest, which made the raids too easy for the majority of people, and ironically by making no changes they made the Classic WoW experience less authentic to the original vanilla World of Warcraft. They could have easily scaled up the difficulty or nerfed us as the players in turn. They could have progressively released every single patch and had the old terrible talent builds, and I probably would have preferred it, to be honest, to the current state of Classic, because it would have made me appreciate how classes have changed so much in since vanilla. From my own experience, I have cleared every single raid from start to finish on the second day of raiding the new raid, but when I played retail it could easily take a good 2 to 3 weeks of solid progression to finally defeat the last boss of a new raid on heroic mode. Now, one of the big issues of the raid being too easy is that you feel less motivated to work on your character, less motivated to farm resistance gear because you don't need it, less motivated to farm gold for consumables and enchants because you don't really need them, and less motivated to level up your best in slot professions and gear, which means generally you're just going to be playing the game less and you're going to be less invested in the game. The only real reason people actually bother to invest vast amounts of time to maximize their character these days is to look cooler on some web page. So now it's an achievement to get high passes, not to actually defeat the last raid boss. Seeing somebody decked out in tier 2 gear is a pretty common sight now in the game when you're wandering around Stormwind or Orgrimmar. Even legendaries like Sulphurus and Thunderfury are a pretty common sight. It doesn't hold the same level as achievement or social impact when you see a rogue with Bloodfang shoulder pads walking around Stormwind as it did in original vanilla. Now obviously a part of that is because we know all the tactics now. We don't have to sit there and figure out the tactics. We can watch videos online, listen to our guild leaders, we've got better communication systems like Discord, and we have better computers. So a part of it is to play on that part, but still you have to admit the raids were way too easy. Now my second point is they released the bad version of Alteric Valley. So back in the day I used to play a lot on the Nestarius vanilla private server on my level 60 hunter, and I honestly didn't do that much raiding because I spent most of my time in Alteric Valley because it was so fun to play. Since the Nestarius team decided to keep the older version of Alteric Valley intact. Old Alteric Valley was a very similar system to Warcraft 3 and even future MOBA games like we have today, because the principle was very simple. You had two sides of a battleground with towers to capture. Each of the towers was guarded by a small raid boss that had to be tanked, and then there was all these cool mini objectives to complete that could either summon an army of Frostwolf cavalry to assist you or an ice elemental raid boss. The point is there was a combination of PvP and PvE content and actual NPCs helped you in the battleground. You were constantly in a battle to push the enemy team back into their base. This was largely assisted by the fact that most of the map was inaccessible because they were covered in landmines that would very easily kill you. This meant you absolutely had to fight on the roads. You couldn't use any cheesy tactics to skip anything. Even when you finally got to the enemy base, dealing with all of the mini bosses like the marshals individually was a very difficult task in itself, because you couldn't just run straight into the boss room and start killing Stormpike or Drekthar. This meant battles went on for hours and hours and even days, which is one of the major criticisms of a battleground. But at the end of the day, if you don't like long battlegrounds, then just queue for the other battlegrounds, because the alternative that we have today is that Horde have a 1.5 hour battleground queue, and the Alliance have a 1% win rate. It's an absolute shambles, the current state of Alterac Valley. People who actually would have queued Alterac Valley because they actually love Alterac Valley would have preferred the old version of the battleground. People who don't like Alterac Valley just wouldn't queue it. So there's no need to cater for the player base that aren't going to play Alterac Valley because they don't like it. Furthermore, the removal of being able to make pre-mades on the Alliance side just made the situation even worse. The pre-made system on Discord actually made Alterac Valley somewhat fun and playable for the Alliance, but then they removed any chance of it happening, so we have it as it is today, which is absolutely terrible. For my third point, we have free character migrations, which in effect killed entire servers. There's no other way of saying it. The way Blizzard have dealt with server population and faction imbalance issues was just very lazy and absolutely shocking. They could have used many different systems to fix faction imbalance issues on individual servers, but instead they just gave everyone a free ticket to another server so that those servers were essentially left abandoned and the situation just got even worse. And then later, when they removed the free character transfers for the faction of the lowest population, they just introduced paid character transfers as a last nail in the coffin to kill those servers, as a way to profit from a terrible situation that they in effect created because they were so inactive and unresponsive to the issue, which could have easily been avoided if they just prevented new accounts from making new Horde characters on high Horde populated servers, or some other similar system, like having free character migration only for the faction that is overpopulated. Number 4, we have layering mistakes. The launch of Classic WoW was probably the least stable launch of any game I've ever played in my life. It was just as bad as the launch of Walls of Drano, where people were stuck in their garrison for hours because they failed to put each and every player within their own shard for their garrison. I've actually played private server launches that have been more stable. They decided on doing layering, but it simply wasn't enough, and they massively underestimated how many servers they would actually need. The total amount of servers has nearly doubled since the launch of Classic. They could have easily introduced a temporary sharding system for the lower levels, maybe to a maximum of 100 players per shard for the level 1 to 10 range so people can actually complete their quests, and then maybe gradually begin to increase it for every layer bracket, and then totally remove sharding after about a couple of weeks and revert to typical layering system that they did have. People were barely able to level their characters effectively, and because they didn't release enough servers, they would have to sit, well, personally me as well, we all had to sit in an 8-hour server queue before you could even play the game. And even when you were in a game, you could, only play for a few hours because you would get randomly booted and have to sit in another 8-hour queue. And our last point, very simply, is just the lack of nerfing. Since the launch of Classic, there have been a number of totally broken borderline exploits found in the game, or simply extremely overpowered systems that have trivialized the content of the game in a way. Obviously, I am talking about things like world buffs, huge dungeon AoE pulls for mages to exploit for gold, power leveling and boosting other people, and even things as simple as very strong consumables. Now, all of these things will be less of an issue if they actually bother to overtune the raid content to make it more difficult, thus making world buffs and consumables useful and not overpowered enough to the point where they trivialize the content. At the end of the day, they made changes to nerf pre-made AV groups and pickpocketing gold farms, so I don't see why they couldn't have just nerfed these AoE grinds and nerfed world buffs slightly. They've proved that they're not shy of making changes, so, why didn't they just do something about it? Maybe having a restriction where world buffs don't stack, or they have a shorter duration, or making it so you can only get the buff more than once. Sorry, you can get the buff more than once. I know people love their world buffs, and me including, you know, to an extent, because they do make you do a lot of damage and they're really fun to have. But at the end of the day, they just made the game way too easy. And I think personally, when I play video games, I like them to be a challenge. One of the most important things for me is the game has to be a challenge, and I have to, well, when it comes to playing an RPG game, you want to work hard on your character and improving your character to make the game easier, to overcome the difficulties in the game. But you don't really need to even do that in WoW. You can just get loads of world buffs and just cheese the content. So in my opinion, that is a less fun system. Obviously, the whole philosophy with Classic WoW has been to not change anything to create the most authentic experience possible. But ironically, by not changing anything, they've made the game so incredibly dissimilar to the experience of the original vanilla. So I think some changes were needed to mitigate that issue, or they could have just done an extremely accurate style of release by releasing every patch progressively, rather than just releasing content progressively. Although that is, you know, more of an unpopular opinion. I think people probably would have found the game so difficult they would find it unplayable. But nonetheless, even a system like that, in my opinion, would have made it better, because it wouldn't have made the raids too ridiculously easy. But anyway guys, that's where I'm going to end the video there. My final thoughts, to be honest, although this appears like a very negative, rambly video, the only thing I really would want changed, or, you know, well, let's speak in past tense because it's not going to happen now, is that the raids were, you know, if the raids were overtuned, I wouldn't have such an issue with everything else. The raids did have to be, in my opinion, a little bit overpowered and changed to make the content more difficult and interesting and challenging. But that's just my humble opinion. Anyway, my name is Metagoblin. Until my next video, ciao.